we're exploring the idea of process philosophy, and I just wanted to briefly summarize what I think we have done before the Christmas break, in order to prepare ourselves for the discussion of today, which should focus on the remainder of dialectical method, Bloch's text, and Hall's article on process, creativity, and anarchy. And these are very, there's a very complex question, I think, that we're trying to solve, to think about. So remember that we started with, at the beginning of the year, we started with the question, what is being, or the question of being. And I said, if we want to make sense of the idea of process, not as just another regional ontology, where we try to ask what is the nature of development, what is the nature of events or processes, or how are they different from things, from particulars that have a continuous existence through time, these kinds of categorical questions, which a lot of philosophers are thinking about. What is the difference between a state and a thing? What is the difference between a quality and a process? These are all very legitimate questions, but it seems to me that there is another question. So this is a familiar point that Heidegger, for example, makes, but Aristotle makes as well, that there are many different types of things, but there's also being itself. They all are. What does that mean? How do we think about that? And what I wanted to put to you was the idea that process philosophy is a way of thinking that is targeted at that level. It is not targeted at the level of particular kinds of being that happen to be movement, but tries to somehow put this question of being in the context of process. So the word process has a properly ontological meaning. It's not an ontic term, it's an ontological term, if you want to put it in terms of Heidegger's ontological difference. We need to qualify that notion of ontological difference, and we'll get to that hopefully later on. So that's to remind us of where we started. Okay. I want to make one more remark about that before we can move on to Bloch and to Hall. And I mentioned this before the break as well. Aristotle says in the Metaphysics, he says, being is said in many ways. Yeah, there are all kinds of being, we just said that. Being said in many ways. We say that qualities are, we say that things are, substances, we say that everything, we can't talk about anything without it being some sort of being. So everything is, and being is said in different ways. Philosophers have spent a lot of time throughout history thinking about what the specific nature is of these many ways in which being is said. And usually, and we know everything about this, usually they come up with some sort of idea of analogy. There's an analogical relation between the different types of being. It is important to note that Aristotle, when he explains this notion of things are said in many ways, the same thing can be said in many different ways. being can be said in many different ways about everything that there is. But he has a specific idea in mind. He elucidates it with the concept of health. That's always his main example. He says, so think about what we call healthy. Yeah? We call a body healthy, or a person, or we call food healthy, or we call a particular atmosphere healthy, or we call we say that there's such a thing as healthcare, or that there are instruments that are healthy or unhealthy for us, or certain activities are healthy or unhealthy. And then he uses that as an example to say this word healthy is said in many different senses of different kinds of things. Yeah? But it all refers to one original sense of healthy, and that's the healthy body. Because healthy food in itself is not healthy. It is healthy because it promotes the health of the body, and so with everything else. Yeah? That we call healthy. So he has the idea that whenever we have a term in language, and it happens quite a lot, that in this way is said in many different ways of different things, that it all derives from one core meaning. And he has the same idea with respect to being. So he says, with being, this is the same. We say many different things that they are, but it all goes back to this one original primary sense of being, and that is what he calls substance. Yeah? So write the word down. He says in Greek, ousia, and in Latin that has become substantia, which we call substance. I'm just repeating a little bit. I hope it's not boring.
No, it's been so long.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and then he says, so what is that? Ousia, or substance, this primary sense of being? Well, it is a classical definition in the categories 2b5, where he says the individual man or horse. So that's an example, yeah. A living being. That is the primary sense of ousia, or substance. That's what you can think about.
Could you repeat that?
An individual living being.
That is the primary sense of
being.
Of being an individual.
So not an artifact. It's very important to remember that. In contemporary discussions, or contemporary, that started really in the 16th, 17th century, I think there has been a shift to thinking about substance in terms of inanimate objects. Yeah? But for Aristotle, it's very clear that an inanimate object does not really qualify as a substance, because the parts of which it exists are indifferent towards each other. So if you have a chair, it's nothing to the chair, how many legs it has, and one leg doesn't relate to the other. If you can take it apart, and then it's just gone. There is an organic integrity to a living being, and that makes it a very different kind of thing from an artifact. He also sometimes uses as the criterion for a substance that it can move out of itself. So that's the definition of being alive. And that it can generate another one of itself. Where if you put, if you plant a chair in the soil, it doesn't grow another chair. So he is thinking about the living organism, and in contemporary philosophy, mostly people are thinking about what some analytic philosophers tend to refer to as middle-sized dry goods. Yeah, so just like a washing machine, something like that.
Sorry, I wasn't able to type fast enough. At one point you said that inanimate object, of course it doesn't qualify as being in Aristotle, but when did it start qualifying as such?
You have to say that again.
When did inanimate objects start qualifying?
Yeah,
as
so I
such?
think that started in the beginning of modern philosophy with Descartes.
Okay.
That we get because Descartes makes this substantial split between matter, res extensa, and thought, res cogitans. And although he says res extensa is not thing, it's more space and time. I think this starts, this idea that an inanimate object is our primary sense of being. Yeah, so, my professor was a student of Peter Strawson, and he always used to say that Peter Strawson always spoke of pucka objects. You know, pucka is proper something you can grab, and that's a thing. And I think that's very, very misleading. So I think Aristotle is closer to the truth. But okay, so hold that idea, yeah, that we have this idea of substance as a primary sense of what is meant by being. Now Aristotle makes another, I mentioned this as well, but makes another very historically influential observation. As you know, Aristotle says the universe, everything there is, can be classified in terms of a specific genus to which something belongs, and then a specific difference that puts it into a species. So the genus-species structure is for Aristotle a way of ordering the world. There is the genus living being, and then we can add a specific difference to it. For example, rational living being. And those are the human beings. Or we can take living being and we can add a specific difference to it, aquatic, and then we have everything that lives in the sea. These sorts of things. Hi, Anna. Come in. And ultimately, let's say things that there are, when you abstract away from as many specific differences as you can, you end up with what Aristotle calls the categories. These are the things that I mentioned at the beginning, the basic types of existence. Something can be a quality, something can be a quantity, something can be a substance, a thing, etc., a relation, etc. There are these 10, he lists 10 categories, highest types of existence. Now, he makes a famous observation, namely that being is not a highest genus. So, we can put anything there is in the structure of genus and species by identifying to which category it belongs and then how it is specifically different from everything else. This does not apply to being. Why does it not apply to being? Because a specific difference that is added to a genus, if I start with the genus living thing, or let's say I start with the category substance, divide it into a number of types of substance, genera. One of them is the living substance, living thing. Yeah. Then I can further specify that whole set of living things by adding something to it that is not itself part of that genus. So a specific difference that I add to a genus in order to get a subset of it, let's say rational, is itself not part of the genus. That wouldn't work. You can understand that. I couldn't differentiate something within a genus if that thing, that character that differentiated it was itself part of the genus. It has to come from somewhere else. It has to be for example, if I take the living beings and I further differentiate them by saying some of them are rational, and I'm adding a quality to this genus of substances such that I pick out a particular subset of them. Is that clear? Yeah? Now, that doesn't work with being. Why not? Because, as I just said, everything is. So I can say of everything that it is. Everything is. So if being was highest genus, then I couldn't make any differentiations within it, because everything that I would use to differentiate would itself be part of the genus, because it is. Yeah?
So are you just saying the copula is not a differentiation? It's not. The copula doesn't differentiate, or there is the being as such.
Yeah, I don't understand what you mean.
I don't know, just from what you said, that's what I got. That being as such doesn't differentiate. It's not differentiating. Because you can't add being to something because it already is.
Yes, that's right. Exactly. Yes. In that sense, being as such is not differentiating. Everything is. Yeah. Yeah. So, for Aristotle, the logic of being is a very different one from the logic of other concepts, which are ordered in terms of the genus and species relation. You can't do that with being. So the way in which being is said in many ways, as it were, is such that it expresses this particular quality or this particular fact about being. And that leads to, a very important point, which it's difficult to explain this, so it's also difficult to me, right? So, if you take the categories, the 10 categories that Aristotle uses, there's something else. So we have the substance. I'll forget about all the others. I'll just talk about the accidents, so the qualities, everything that pertains to substance. Yeah. So there is a horse, and the horse can be black. So we have the horse, and we have its blackness. It's an accident. Some of these accidents are proper to the horse. If it loses that accident, it's no longer a horse. Some are not proper, it can change. Yeah, but that's for now our discussion is not important. The way in which being is said in many ways is such that there is a primary instance of being, which is the substance for Aristotle. That's primary being, that's ousia. There's a complex question there about how matter and form are related in substance. We're not going to talk about that now. And then there are these other types in the categories. So I believe there are 9 types of those. Being is said in a different way from these than it is from substance. That relation is an analogical one. Yeah? I think that's right. Yeah?
I think so.
That's right. Yeah? So, but what it means is that the relation between a substance and an accident, so between a thing and the qualities that it has, or the relations in which it stands, this whole sphere, is from a very different nature than the relation between subject and predicate. Aristotle makes that quite clear, or maybe not quite clear, but it has to be said, and in medieval logic that becomes very clear, that the relation between the subject and the predicate of the judgment, there we are dealing with abstract concepts, is very different from the relation between substance and accident.
This pen might be a bit of that. I'm not sure. It might
Yeah, is that a...
might not be big enough.
Yeah. That's great. So if we say the horse is black, shall I try?
Yeah.
So if we say we have the judgment the horse is black, that's a subject, predicate. What's the subject of the sentence? The horse. Predicate is black or is black. That's two concepts that are united, can be expressed in different ways. You could say, in contemporary predicate logic, you would say there is an X, such that X is a horse. There's one individual in the whole set of all horses, and there is a set of black things. And the statement says that these two sets overlap for that particular thing. That's one way of putting it. I think Aristotelian logic, you would also have an abstract concept. And horse refers to everything that fits the definition of horse, and black refers to everything that fits the definition of black. And the statement connects one concept to another. But here, in terms of substance and accident, it is different. It's not the case that a substance exists, is the enumeration or the summation of all the accidents that pertain to it. The relation is a very different one. It's one that can only be expressed analogically. But it is such that the accident, that's Aristotle's main definition, the difference between substance and all the other forms of being, is that the accident, it cannot exist independently. It can only exist in, he says, a substance, whereas a substance can exist independently. So a horse can exist independently, but a color can only be a color of something. Or a particular relation in which something stands, so it can only be a particular relation of something. And this relation of which you might call inherence, that qualities or the accidents inhere in the substance, that is a very different relation from the relation between the subject and the predicate. They are, as it were, they are almost equal, you know. You could almost turn them around, or they are sort of an equal status. This is a logical relation, and this is an ontological relation. And precisely because Aristotle makes such a big point of the fact that the ontological relation is not one of genus and species, being is not highest genus. So the logic of the term being functions in a very different way from how subjects and predicates in the declarative propositions function. You get a completely different relation here than you have here. Now, this becomes very important. Why? Because Aristotle uses this notion of substance for many reasons, but one of the reasons why he uses it is to give an explanation of becoming, of change. He says, how can it be, so from Greek philosophy we get the starting point in the relation between Heraclitus and Parmenides. Heraclitus says everything is becoming, everything flows. Parmenides says being is, only being is, there is no movement. Movement is illusory. It was a big problem for the Athenian thinkers to bring those two together and to find a coherent explanation of what change is. So Aristotle comes up with this idea and says the substance is that which doesn't change, and what changes are the accidents. So the horse can, or I can be dark blonde and in a few years' time I'll be grey. That's a change, but I haven't changed. And that, of course, makes sense from Aristotle's point of view, because these accidents, ontologically speaking, as it were, inhere fully in the substance. That is, they don't make up the substance. The relation between the substance and the accident is not the one of subject and predicate. if you were to say he uses this logic of subject and predicate to explain change, and it doesn't make sense, because what is that subject that doesn't change? And how can it be that certain predicates, that one predicate applies to it now, and another predicate at some other time, and it hasn't changed? That becomes, when you put it abstractly, it becomes, or logically, it becomes a totally unworkable explanation. But when you see that substance accident is a way of articulating almost, I would almost like to say, the phenomenology of being, what it is for a thing to be, whether it has certain independence, and there are certain things that cannot be independent of it, but which nevertheless are in it, or make it up, then it becomes a much more useful explanation. There are also problems there that I can't develop now. But nevertheless, what is important to see is that substance, I think that is why Aristotle puts the emphasis on the living being. Substance is movement, is change, is development. A person or an animal or a plant or anything living is constant movement from what it can be, what it is in potency, to what it is actually, how it changes over time. Well, it's one big way of thinking movement. If you do not see that the relation between substance and accident is a very different one from the relation between subject and predicate, so if you forget about the metaphysical, the ontological aspect of subject and accident as being analogically related senses of being, then this substance-accident scheme becomes useless. And I think that is what happened with the heritage of Aristotle over the centuries. So Whitehead, who starts by saying, the subject-predicate scheme of thought is completely unfit to think being, and the subject-predicate form of thought has led to substance thinking, to the idea that the world consists of particulars that in some sense relate or make up what it means to be. That is completely inadequate. That's right. But to suggest that the notion of substance is a derivative of the subject-predicate structure, that is, well, as far as Aristotle is concerned, is not correct. And also not as far as, let's say, Aristotle's inheritance in medieval metaphysics is concerned, it's also not correct. So you might say that all the process philosophers that we're looking at, and it starts with Hegel actually, who say the notion of substance is inadequate. Why? Because it is this unmovable thing to which qualities pertain in an external way, and that it doesn't explain anything, it doesn't explain process, you can't capture process with it. They are talking about a notion of substance that is a directly related to the logical notion of subject. But that's not what Aristotle is talking about. Aristotle is much more processual in that respect than the process thinkers who turn against the tradition of substance thinking. Try to think is the case. So the same goes for Hegel. So Hegel, if you sum up Hegel, he sums himself up in one sentence: from substance to subject. That's what he says. And he has. We will see that in the text today. We saw it also when we were looking at the text earlier. He has he thinks subjectivity has to be thought processually. It's a process, it's a dialectical thing, a dialectical development in which the subject comes to itself. And he takes substance to be this individual, independently existing, immovable thing. I think maybe he has it from Spinoza. The notion of a substance, Spinoza, substance that which requires nothing but itself in order to exist. Now, you can already see that substance is that which requires nothing but itself to exist. That does not apply to what Aristotle means by substance. because a man, a human being or an animal requires a lot to exist. It could not exist for a moment on its own. That doesn't make it any less of a substance for Aristotle. Why? Because relation is not some added thing to the substance. It is the very being of the substance, or accident is the very being of the substance, but in this way, in which there is something that's independent, of which something is said and something that is said of. I think it's only if you take substance to be equivalent to the subject predicate structure, so if you have already made it into a logical thing, that you can get into the situation that Hegel finds himself in, where he's trying to find an alternative to this notion of substance. And maybe you can even say he misses there what substance really is. So when we So when we want to understand what I'm going to read something to you. When we want to understand what this notion of process that means, at the end of, so we always have to be very careful to ask ourselves, what does the critique of substance really mean? And if process philosophy is only this critique of a so-called notion of substance, then I think it misses the boat, because it then is just it plays out just on the logical level. Whereas one of the big achievements, which hasn't even been covered up, of classical metaphysics is to see that there is this huge distinction between a metaphysical way of thinking about the world and a logical way of thinking about the world. They are very, very different. So that is an important point for us to bear in mind. And we will see in Bloch, hopefully we're going to pay a little more attention to I wrote a paper about this once, which got really bad reviews about substantiality in Bloch. He has this notion of substantialität, and with him it is associated with what he calls depth. So the depth of things is their substantiality. So he uses substance almost in the way in which we say that certain things have substance, something there. And then he puts it in the context of this dialectical process of hope, where the substance of things has to be brought out. Well, that is that old notion of substance that he uses. Because that is, so Aristotle would say the same thing. Substance and accident are not outside of each other, they are inside, within each other. The accident is within the subject, in the substance of it. So the way a substance, an ousia, a real being, the way it becomes real, it becomes what it is by having all these accidents and all these relations and all these qualities. So the way a horse becomes a real horse is by, producing new little horses, or eating, or running, or performing, being friend of humans, or all these things that the substance can engage in order to actualize itself. As Aristotle says, that self-actualization, the actualization of what you have potentially in you, that is what it means to be. That is what he tries to think with this notion of substance and accident, and that's precisely how Bloch uses this term, but he speaks of substantiality, and he says that this gives a direction to the process. So he overcomes this opposition between what we very often schematically call substance metaphysics and process metaphysics. I think that is that's an important point to bear in mind. Yeah? it comes out right at the end of the chapter that we had started to read, where Bloch quotes from, I think from the Phenomenology of Spirit. I'll read it in English. Oh no, Philosophy of Right, sorry. Just how strongly the dialectical in Hegel can, that's on page 311 of the English translation. Just how strongly the dialectical in Hegel can beat with passion is illustrated by the following stunning passage, full of the depth of experience, here we see the word depth already. Yeah,
270.
311.
311.
So always when substance is in the air of the block, there's the word depth around. Full of the depth of experience from the philosophy of right on dialectic of love. The first moment in love is that I do not wish to be an independent person for myself, and that if I were, then I would feel myself to be inadequate and incomplete. The second moment is that I find myself in another person, that I matter to her, which she also achieves in me. Hegel is, of course, a heteronormative writer. Love is thus the greatest contradiction, and the understanding cannot resolve it, because there is nothing harder than this pointedness of self-consciousness which is negated and which I should have as affirmative. Love is the generation and the resolution of the contradiction at the same time. As resolution, it is ethical unity. That points to what is for logic a paradox, in the sense that you can't understand it. That points to a specific aspect, I think, of being, of this the logic of being, or the metaphysics of being, in the sense that the accident relation, so the way, let's say, the way two people can be related to each other in the experience of love, is such that the closer the relation is, the more a person can be independent, can be themselves. It is only when somebody recognizes me really for who I am, as it were, that I can fully be myself. So there's a paradoxical aspect to relationality, which Hegel highlights here, namely that it's not the case, as it would be with logical relations, that the more we are one, the more we are together, the less I can be myself. No, it's the other way around. With social relations, it's precisely the other way around. That was just one example of a social relation. It applies also to relations in the state and in the family and in the community. It is precisely the togetherness which allows for the independence, which allows for me to become myself, and for the other to become themselves. That is not a problem to think. In fact, it can be expressly articulated, has been expressly articulated in a metaphysical understanding of the notion of substance. Because we don't have to, we can take reality as part, relation as part of the substance accident scheme. It is difficult to think this particular point if we stick to this logical subject-predicate structure, where things have to be outside of each other and added to each other, and where we have this logical identity that's going on. So here you see in Hegel's text itself, and I think that's why Bloch puts it at the end here, of his discussion of the dialectical method. We see that this notion of substance, or this classical notion of substance, in a way comes back. Okay, that's a bit of a roundabout way to start by basically by highlighting that when we try to make sense of the notion of process, we should not fall back in this simplistic questioning in which we say certain ontologies say that things are basic and certain ontologies say that processes are basic. That's not what we are talking about. So I would like to say a process philosophy is a way of rethinking substance. It's not a way of getting rid of substance, but it's a way of rethinking substance. I think if we look at it in that way, in 2 sessions from now, we will start with Whitehead. We will talk a bit about it today. We'll start to see that is how Whitehead should be read. I'll just give you one tip of the list, one tip of the veil. Whitehead, in his system, has what he calls the general Aristotelian principle. And he has the reform subjectivist principle, but that's something else. But he has a general Aristotelian principle which says, apart from what he calls actual entities, and these are events for him, apart from actual entities, there is nothing. Or in some also the rest is silence. Apart from actual entities, there is nothing. And these actual entities are what he calls events or occasions. And so they become, that's where the process sits. They are happenings. But everything else, so basically that's why he calls it Aristotelian principle. He says, Aristotle says the same. Aristotle says, what is real are substances. And everything else exists only in substances. Colors, qualities, all these things exist only in substances. Relations exist only in substances. It's the same as what he says. How can he say it? Whitehead doesn't make explicit, but I think it's the same structure as in Aristotle. Being is not a genus. It's not the highest genus. So at the level of, that's what I got from Nathaniel, what I got from Joseph Owens. I posted this on Facebook. Being is not the highest genus. So when we talk about being as polykosmic ontai, what is said in many different ways, then it is referred back to an original sense of being, and that is the being of substance. In other words, at the level of being, the genus is the species. That sounds a bit cryptical, sorry. The genus is the species. Mm-hmm. So you might say, you have these 10 categories, the 10 types of being. Why is this one particular substance, why is that suddenly so primary? It's just a species. Yeah? Well, no, because the genus-species structure doesn't work. You might say, metaphorically speaking, the species becomes the genus. The thing, the substance, the ousia, that becomes the genus. It's not a genus, but if it were a genus, that would be it. Yeah? So that's how he can then say, so everything else that exists in it. Not as a predicate that is added to a subject, but in it, in this ontological sense. And that functions exactly the same way in Whitehead. And that's why he can then say, apart from actual entities, there's nothing. That doesn't mean to say actual entities are the only things that there are, because actual entities have qualities. They have forms, they have this kind of relation. They create a temporal continuum, they create an extensive continuum, a spatial continuum. But these exist only in the self-actualization, the self-actualizing activity of the event or the happening. The actual entity. And that's why he calls it actual entity. I'm going very fast now. A lot of people have said of Whitehead, if you're a process philosopher, then why do you speak of entity? Because with entity we're back with the thing, the substance, the table or the chair. That's not the case. Entity is ousia. Okay, so bear in mind that we try to make this tradition of process philosophy as philosophically interesting as possible by seeing that we are dealing here with this level of what is the meaning of being. Yeah? And we try to say that process somehow comes in when we try to articulate that. That's also why Heidegger's text will be important for us, because you see the same thing going on there in a slightly different way. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Well, when you brought up the differences between ontological differences and logical, ontological relations and logical relations. First you talk about the substance accidents, and then under logical relations you talk about subject predicate, and you gave the example of the horse is black. The horse is the substance. The predicate is the accident is black. But could you give an example for the subject predicate?
Well, if you say it as a judgment, the horse is black, then it's a subject predicate structure. But if you're talking about the blackness of the horse, then it's a substance accident structure, and these two do not pair up. Yeah.
Are there any examples where the substance accident structure does not work? I'm just thinking, is there any? I don't know, a dying man. The man is dying. Dying is the quality or the accident, and then man is just being viewed as the substance.
Yeah.
But is there? I'm just thinking, would there be any example that would not work with that categorization?
The man is dying, so all these it's a good example in all these present continuous forms of verbs in English. Dying, eating, John is buttering the toast, that's a famous example from Donald Davidson. They signal events. Because to say John is dying is a happening.
Yeah.
There's something that has a beginning and an end, and it's the process in which this person John moves from the state of being alive to the state of being dead. I think with the case of a dying man, there's still a clear substance.
Mm-hmm.
But other examples have been given. So, for example, the buttering of the toast. John butters the toast. Is there an event there, an actual entity that is a buttering of the toast? And how many are there? Could there be? Or where does it begin? Where does it end? These become very difficult questions. Or if you think of a thunderstorm, we say there's a thunderstorm, or the thunderstorm started at 7 o'clock and it was over at 8. What is the substance there? How can you talk about that in terms of substance and accident? Or an economic crash, the Wall Street crash, or these sorts of things. Is there a substance that has an accident, or what is going on there? That's a good question. What could we say about it? This is what process philosophers in general have sort of always said, that these kinds of things, earthquakes, thunderstorms, episodes of dying, etc., maybe also that they don't have a substance. You can't capture them in terms of substance and accident.
Okay, so when one says that the horse is black, when one utters it as a judgment, it is a logical relation. So the other kind of, the ontological relation, that is not uttered as a judgment, but as what? What is the term for it?
Well,
if I am pronouncing the sound, yes, it is an ontological relation, but versus the logical relation. So. However, with logical relation, it is uttered as the sentence is uttered as a judgment. So, in the case of ontological relation, it is uttered as what?
It's uttered always as a logical relation, but it refers. So, in the order of understanding, it's a logical relation, but it refers to an order of being, in which the relation is slightly different. There's a difference between abstract and concrete, as it were.
So the concrete one is the ontological.
Yeah.
Okay, so both of them are judgments. Both kind of relations. The
substance relation is not a judgment. It's just something real.
So what is term for it? That is what I was trying to ask.
It's a real relation. It's a real relation and,
Okay,
not a logical judgment. So there's a real relation between substance and an accident, and not, and whereas in subject predicate there's a logical relation. So I think that's the way to put it. But I want to go back to the question first about the rain, the thunderstorm. So what is the answer to this question? I'm going to give it. Is there an answer to it, or is this a reason to say no? This is precisely what the process philosophers are talking about, and that's why Aristotelian ontology doesn't work. So we say things like the thunderstorm started at 7 and was over by 8, or the heat spell lasted for 5 weeks, or yeah.
So it's the question whether, for instance, the thunderstorm is a substance.
Yeah, so that can't be.
Because it starts at a point and it's over at a point.
Yeah.
But then couldn't you say that a man or a human being,
Yeah.
the same applies to a man or a human being because it only exists, or he/she only exists for a certain amount of time?
Yeah.
Because is there a difference if you say the thunderstorm starts at 7 and is over by 8, or the human, as John was born in 1980 and died in 2014?
Yeah. Exactly.
Does Aristotle think substance is corruptible, or is it just continuous despite its accidents?
No, it's not incorruptible. It's continuous despite its accidents, but it can have a beginning. There are finite substances. Like John who was born in 1980, died in 2014. He had a beginning and an end.
Mm-hmm.
There are also substances that are incorruptible for Aristotle, that have always been there. So the prime mover, for example, is or the stars, the heavenly bodies. They have existed forever, and they will exist forever.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the prime mover doesn't change, but the celestial bodies change. They move around, but they are eternal.
So calling a thunderstorm a substance, you have to kind of consider it as an individual. And as an individual,
exactly.
a beginning and end, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right, just consider it as an individual. So you would then have to say, if you approach it logically, you would have to say, what are the identity conditions of it? Can I specify what sets it apart from everything else? Well, probably you can. Maybe they're a bit fuzzy, because where does it exactly begin, or in space, so that's maybe a bit. But on the whole, it seems to be that also with human beings is not that clear. If you start to look at the microscopic level, where do I stop and does the environment begin? It's just not really clear. So from that perspective, what is the difference between a thunderstorm and life? A life is also an event. It's a long process, but it's something that occurs, that happens. You might say, well, I'm not my life, but at least partly I am. Aristotle would probably say, and I think actually Whitehead would probably agree with him to a large extent, a thing like a thunderstorm is what the medieval logicians call an ens rationis, is a rational entity. It is a sort of entity. You can talk about it, but it's something that a reason produces. It is not. So it doesn't exist independently of some substances that are involved in it. Otherwise, there would be no thunderstorm. Mm-hmm. So it's a very complex entity, but it hasn't got. So, for example, one of the criteria for being an entity is to be able to affect something else. Of course, the thunderstorm can have a lot of effects, but it's not the thunderstorm itself that makes the flood. It's the strength of the wind, or the way that, if you think about wind, is air pushing with a certain energy toward against something else. So there's always it's a very complex event, but it's not. It doesn't have a core of independent activity of its own. Maybe, yeah. I don't know how far. It's a good question. I don't know how far it goes. And maybe there is a need to widen the notion of substance in this sense as well, not just along the lines along which I was talking about. How I wanted to say process is a rethinking of substance. That might also mean that substance needs to be rethought, and that we can talk about a life of a person or a thunderstorm as, in some sense, substantial. And that would go a long way towards how Bloch talks about it, I think. So the relation between a person and their life is very, very complex one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did I catch you correctly when you said that for Aristotle some substances are corruptible? For example, man could be born and died. Did I catch you correct? Okay.
Yeah. Whitehead even goes so far as to say, for an actual entity, their becoming is their perishing.
For an actual entity?
Their becoming is their perishing. So the moment the event is complete, it has become what it is, it's gone. Yeah. And that's also in a way true for human life. And Heraclitus says the same thing, we live our death and we die our lives. Yeah. So I think that's the same idea. It's over. And then it is what it has been. But still, I think, we can talk about in detail about what is the relation, for example, between a person and their lives. So it's a phenomenological discussion. Okay, very good. So we haven't answered your question, but it's in the air now. Yeah? Okay, so now quickly going back to the Bloch text. Yeah, so we started reading this in great detail. It's in that book, The Election Tutorial. How far did we get?
Not very far. I have wrote until the end of page 286.
Yeah, we only did a few pages of it.
Yeah, but then the week after we went all the way up to...
Okay, that's true. I was not here when...
Yeah.
I tried today.
to see... I think 291. I don't know whether this is my own reading though. So 290 was where you stopped.
Yeah, that's right. Who can give a summary of what we did? Or what the highlights will have? Wait, So what is this text about? Let's be very instrumental, because otherwise we're going to be stuck with text for the rest of the seminar. What are we trying to get out of this one?
Well, what is Bloch? For our understanding of process philosophy.
Yeah.
Well, Bloch's conception of dialectics,
Exactly.
which is different from, and he does a genealogy a bit
Yeah,
in this text,
Yeah, that's right.
and starts with Hegel and Aristotle and Plato,
Yeah.
and says what they each got right and not.
So how does he try to? What does he try to? What does he say about? Well, what is dialectic? How is dialectic process?
Well,
Yeah. So
isn't, well, I mean, basically for Hegel, isn't dialectic just the causal interaction of subject and object? So it's a kind of process of interaction. Well, at least on one level. And so I suppose for Bloch, Hegel's crucial for Bloch in that sense. Yeah, so it's causal interaction, a process of interaction.
Well, I think central to Bloch's, what catches Bloch's attention is the notion of negation as a kind of explosive act, which propels, and of which, contradiction is turned into something creative, and that is what dynamizes the whole process and allows the process to move forward. So explosion, explosiveness, negation, those are key words. Unity of contradictions is a very dynamic process, and it broaches no harmonious compromise.
that's right. Also otherness, huh?
Yeah.
Alteritas.
The negation is, otherness, they go hand in hand together.
Yeah.
Sure.
It is almost as if the relation between thinking and being itself becomes a dialectical relation. Negation is not just a negation in the thing, that the thing has contradiction in itself, but it's also the relation between thinking and being. Is also a negation. Thinking, or let's say consciousness, talks about that as well, is in a way a negation of that of which it is conscious. Otherwise it could not be what it is. So the relation of intentionality, of being conscious of something, exists as a kind of negativity. I am not the chair, if I know the chair. That is a dialectical relation. So the relation between thinking and being itself is part of the dialectical process. That is certainly the case for Hegel. And I think in this text, Bloch always says about Hegel, yeah, it's all, this is Marx says, the structure is all fine, but it's just conceptual, it's just a logic. Bloch makes it into an ontology. So strangely enough, there's a strong relation between what we said earlier about substance accident and subject predicate. He makes it ontological. He says this dialectic, first of all, the relation between thinking and being is in what he calls matter. It's part of material existence. In philosophische Aufsätze zur objektiven Fantasie, where he has this remark about the tear in matter and also in the Logos der Materie. Matter is not this fixed clots, is not this immovable thing. Matter has got tears and ruptures in it, and that is Geist, that is spirit. Those are, in a way, moments of negation, which he tries to make as concrete as possible. And you might say that the knower and the known is an example of that. The knower is, in a way, The knower is a tear in the object, in what can be known.
Or it's just like what he said about, it's just like what Hegel's critique of Kant, that to encounter the limit is already to go beyond it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's of course also a key idea here. That classical Hegelian idea to know limits to go beyond it. But then he also makes the point. So I'm just highlighting a few points now from the text. That, and he takes that over from Engels, that nature itself, not thought of in terms of the dialectical relation to mind, but nature itself has a dialectical structure. So he says on page 295, in the middle, the atom too behaves as well in theory as in practice dialectically.
Excuse me, which page is it?
295.
295, okay, thank you.
Not only to the extent that the electrons in whose motion the atom consists represent something so full of contradiction as wave and particle at the same time, but also that the splitting of the atom sets free energy bound within it. Thus the so-called building blocks of the world, which are being so badly administered at the moment, are in no sense stable, to say nothing of the enormous complex of life and society. The dialectic pulls he who does not wish to come along behind it. Those who are willing, it leads. In both cases, the belief that it has an invalid humanizing effect can change nothing. The world moves itself. It is not dialectic that is improperly anthropomorphic, but rather positivism, which, because it is so, disavows it. I lead to discussion with positivism for a moment. But he points out that an atom is, or an electron has a wave character and a particle character. That seems to be a contradiction. That points to a real dialectic. He also points out in other places that an organizational form, it can be more than the parts that go up into the thing that make it up. So a living organism has that's a kind of, he uses Engels uses the term starting points. Nature creates new starting points. So society, although Bloch's materialist, society cannot be reduced to, let's say, the physics of our bodies. Yeah? We cannot understand society. So we couldn't have in this positivist view of science, we couldn't have an ultimate physical theory that explained everything, also how society works, or also how individual psychology works. No, there are jumps in nature, there are new starting points, and they have their own independent affectivity, efficaciousness. So by the moment you get what we call human beings, you have to understand them in their own terms. They're not just made up for whatever happens at a human level. That is not just a direct effective result of what happens below it. And that is an idea that's a very dialectical idea, because that involves a negation and it involves a sublation. And at the same time, a sublation in the key Hegelian sense, an Aufhebung of a cancellation, and also of a Aufbewahrung, of taking something with you to another level. That is a key idea, and again, it is a very, very traditional idea, because in Aristotle, it is called substantial form. So Aristotle has this notion of substantial form, and it became later in medieval philosophy, but certainly also with Leibniz, it became a central thing to say that, let's say, a substance of a human being is not just all the parts that make it up, but it has, as a collection of all those parts, it has a substantial form of its own that makes it into the thing that it is. In other words, forms of organization which the whole is more than the parts that make it up. Yeah, let's close the door. That idea that the whole can be more than the parts that make it up, for Bloch applies throughout nature, and that is a dialectical moment. Yeah?
Well, actually, I mean, in a way, maybe it is not even related to the formal cause in Aristotle.
It is related to, I don't think he makes a relation, but I think it is systematically, it is related to the notion of substantial form.
Yeah, but it's also related to, I mean, like in the four courses, the formal course.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that is why it is more than word.
It is a formal cause, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah, absolutely.
Even though for me it is formal course, somehow, I mean, with the teleological course, I mean, the end course inserted into it.
Really?
Isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I think, I mean, actually, what makes the whole more, I mean, an excess of the different parts that collect them together is driven by both the formal course and the teleological course.
Yeah, exactly. It is it is the goal, so that for which it is organized.
Yeah, the goal of the form itself.
And the form itself.
Yeah.
And you might say it is the dynamic principle. So it is in a way all the elements and then the dynamic relation to which they are brought together. That and with that you are very close to Hegel's notion of the
exactly.
of the dialectical development.
Yeah.
And let's link that to page 298. Well, now you can understand, hopefully, this beginning of the page. If however, the process is taken as real, and the seriousness of the negative is taken seriously, then it is not difficult to see that a completely different element than spirit constitutes the leaven of the dialectic. There where it first appears as a dialectic of reality, realdialectic, without panlogism, without the conceptual mythology. The actual dialectical impulse is need. Only this produces the contradiction as something unsatisfied, as something unfulfilled by the world confronting it, the perpetually emerging, exploding contradiction. Yeah. Does that speak for itself now?
Could you give an example of that?
That's a good question.
Like a practical example, what kind of need could it be? What could we think?
Yeah, hunger, for example. Huh?
Well, the Koshev,
The need to eat. Yeah.
Koshev's explication is perfect here.
Yeah, but can you? Yeah.
Well, I mean, Koshev uses hunger to explain the mind.
Yeah.
And exactly, he is what makes Hegel completely concrete and along precisely these lines. Where is it again? Need productive force. So, yeah, that's exactly what Koshev says.
How does he explain it?
Let me try to remember. I taught that text 2 times before, a long time ago. Something unsatisfied. Yeah, because I mean, Koshev also uses uses need, I mean hunger, to explain both consciousness and desire.
What is the contradiction of hunger?
I'm trying to remember.
How is hunger a contradiction?
Well, he explains it in terms of the all forms of existence is oneself. So hunger drives you out to the other.
Yeah.
You internalize the other,
Yeah.
so that negates your own form of existence, because it's already a combination of both the self and the other.
Exactly. Plus it
So
negates the
that
other.
is how he. But I mean, he talks about two kinds of desire, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, that is what Levinas uses to explain two kinds of desire. I mean, the lower form of desire, the vulgar form of desire, is only, I mean, the self gobbling up the other in order to further extend the other, whereas the high form of desire, which Khrushchev calls the desire to desire, is the desire for recognition.
Yeah.
That is an endless form of desire. So that is what Levinas calls the ethical desire.
Yeah. That's
So
right.
desire by itself always negates your own form of existence, because it's like, I mean, it's no longer the self, but it involves the other. It involves the self going out tending toward the other, and through this dialectical process, I mean, the self is being transformed, so that it's a negation of the old form of
exactly.
existence. So that is exactly how Khrushchev explains Hegel.
Is that an example?
Yeah.
So hunger, so the being is self-sufficient. Hunger is contradiction because it means it's not self-sufficient.
Yeah, hunger.
You need the other.
Yeah, hunger is precisely what makes the subject realizes that it's not.
That is not
Not complete.
But
That mhm.
hunger makes you eat the other, and then the other becomes you.
Yeah.
So it is a negation of yourself and a negation of the other. Desire, or the desire of desire or to desire, is the desire that the other recognizes me as who I am, as desiring, and that is not that's a negation in a different sense. It's not one that leads to the negation of the other, but it's one that leads to the recognition of the other as another, also needed for me to be myself. Yeah? So, and here in the text is nice that he ends with the example, the quote on love, which is, as I said, a form of recognition. Yeah? So, sometimes when we are in love, we say, I could eat you. I could eat you alive, or something like that. Yeah. We say, in Dutch we say that. We don't say it.
In Dutch, that is amazing.
In Dutch we say that. Yeah.
Well, because I mean, people, when I was at Leiden, actually, people always talk about how I mean, flirting is a no-no in Dutch culture. So they say Dutchmen never flirt.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's right.
Because it is not allowable, it is improper.
Yeah. But they do say I could eat you alive, but only if it's consensual. So it's a nice example, I think, because there you play with the difference between hunger and desire, and you do it in precisely by intellectualizing it plays with the double. So it's nice that it comes back in the text there. Therefore, at the end of the paragraph, dialectic is no virgin birth from the supposed independent life of the concept and no perpetual mobile. The dialectical ratio of history is that of the production process and its real subject-object relations. Only in history is there a dialectically self-developing relation of man to man and to nature. In other words, the motive, and that's a question that Hegel Bloch asks at several points in this chapter, what sets this process in motion? It's one thing to talk about dialectical structure between concepts, but what makes it actually really a developmental process, or what gives it its energy? And there I think we see a big difference between Bloch and Hegel coming up. So Bloch says, we're going to read on page 298, of course, Hegel noticed himself that the concepts cannot walk on their own. He recognized the problem of the impulse to dialectical movement and added a factor which, although it does not refer to the will, is certainly not purely logical. It is the factor of totality. Hegel works with this at every point, or rather he lets it work for him. Logically, totality is the unity of the universal and the particular. And thus, in Hegel's philosophy of nature and of spirit, it is concrete wholeness and then completeness. It is the completely mediated for itself, the absolute, and its opposite is the patchwork, the incomplete and finite. In that the incomplete aspires to completion, and the finite is precisely that which collides with its limitations, need enters the concept from a completely unexpected side. In this case, as the will to overcome the fixed boundary in the form of ability and its abstraction, the ought. Nina, can you explain that?
I always struggle a bit with this Bloch's concept of the drive. I always feel as if he starts with this, it's his presupposition.
Yeah.
And that then when he introduces it, for example, here into as the drive or as that which moves the dialectics, it makes very much sense.
Yeah.
But I always I have an issue because it seems it's almost a bit a bit too instrumental, and it fits so nicely.
I'm sorry.
But if we do accept it, that the substance or the matter or the being is always incomplete, and that incompleteness is grounded, that it could be something higher,
Mm-hmm.
and that matter could or is somehow aware of the possibility of that higher, and that is then translated into the need, and that is what then generates the next steps in dialectics.
Well, what do you think the difference is between Bloch's version of need and Hegel's version of need? So how does Hegel smuggle need into the dialectic? You have to go. Okay. Yeah.
That I don't quite understand. I always thought that's primarily Bloch's own concept.
It is Bloch's own. It's certainly Bloch's own obsession to ask the question: how does the whole of the world gets moving, as it were. Yeah. But in Hegel, as far as I understand Hegel, that there's also a kind of idea about it, which Bloch tries to explain here. He says that this is the factor of totality. So one of the brilliant insights of Hegel is to say that if you have the idea of the whole or the infinite, then it must include the finite within it. Because there can be nothing that is outside of it. If you think of the idea of the totality or the whole or the absolute, then there can be nothing that's not part of it, because then it wouldn't be the absolute or it wouldn't be the infinite.
Mm-hmm.
And so the absolute has to include its own negation. So the infinite has to go through its own negation, the finite, and then come back to itself.
Mm.
And only then is it infinite. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Okay.
I think what he's saying here is, for Hegel,
Mm.
that is what sets the thing going. That is why there is a dialectic, why it moves, because obviously everything there is everything there is. The absolute is. It could not be. So it must be the case that it goes through its own negation and comes back to itself. So do you see the logical structure of the argument?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, whereas Bloch does not perceive that.
He says that's conceptual mythology.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what is real is material need.
Yeah.
Is the fact that nothing is yet done with itself, that everything needs something else. And we can use Hegel's dialectic to understand the structure of need, the structure of the historical development. But we have to see that what comes in, the factor that Hegel tried, that for Hegel is according to Bloch, insufficiently thought of, is pure materiality, pure life, need, life, and ultimately, I think, will. The will. So that the will is something that is different from the mind or the spirit. In Hegel, it becomes, that's what he says down in the paragraph, it becomes old. So it becomes a norm. It becomes almost the whole sphere of normativity, which in the later Hegelian interpretations, Brandom and Pipp in contemporary American Hegelianism is so important. They reduce almost all of Hegel to this idea of how social normativity comes about. That has its ground here. It's almost as if Bloch is saying, if you're an idealist about need, then it becomes old, it becomes normativity. Just that the totality has to become itself by going through its negation. It's almost the sphere of requirement or normativity that is.
Okay, yeah, that explains nicely, yeah.
It's a logicized form of need, of will. And that leads to the big question in a Bloch interpretation, what the relation between intellect and will is. And I think Bloch is very much Schopenhauer, influenced by Schopenhauer there. Very much, so there's a very strong influence of Schopenhauer in addition to Hegel in his understanding of will. But he doesn't talk about that here. That's why he says, well, this is why the dialectic in Hegel becomes homogeneous. It has a tendency to become schematic.
So is Bloch kind of saying that totality is Martha and not Mary? It's the active life, and you can't contemplate totality. This doesn't exist.
Yeah.
That's kind of, because that's the weird thing about him, is he's kind of saying that infinity doesn't exist, if you can call it existing, even in Hegel.
Yeah.
But then, how does infinity come from the finite? It doesn't really. It's strange.
Yeah, that's what he tries to think with this noch nicht. Yeah. Not yet. That's right, it's strange. Not yet is a form of being. Everything is already ordered towards infinity. But that's very true, that you cannot for Bloch, you cannot contemplate totality. That's why I was thinking about it. That's why he says in the Leipziger Vorlesungen über die Geschichte der Philosophie, in the thing about classical philosophy, where he gives a lecture on Plotinus, and he says the things that Neoplatonism is talking about, they are important, they are real, but it is too early to talk about them in the way that the Neoplatonists do. We're not there yet, and I think that is what you feel. That's maybe what he would say here about this question of totality as well. Yeah? But you can't forget about it. You can't understand any concrete reality today without seeing this unum necessarium, or the invariant of direction, which is always this point beyond, which is a totality. So, and the whole of Utopia is central. It's a central element in the Utopia. That the core of it is this unsayable. Same thing all the time that we cannot put into words.
Yeah, I mean the notion of need or desire of wish is inextricably bound with completeness or totality, or right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, so utopia as totality is totality in that way, as non-contemplatable totality. But, and this is the point, if you forget it, then your utopia becomes concrete, becomes programmatic, abstract totalitarianism. I think that is constantly the point he tries to maintain, that we cannot forget about the totality, because if we do, our utopia has become totalitarian, but not forgetting about it means knowing that we don't know what it is. Yeah, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why Adorno says Bloch. How does he say this? Bloch says.
Bloch says overdona.
Adorno says about Bloch that Bloch refuses to say unequivocally. Yeah, you can only say it in German, I've translated. Bloch sagt unzweideutig, was nicht eindeutig sagen möchte. So do you see the difference between unzweideutig and eindeutig? Yeah, that's dialectic. That's a dialectical thing. That unzweideutig is not the same as eindeutig. It's like unzweideutig was sich verweigert, eindeutig zu sagen, or something. But I think that's how that yeah. Nathaniel?
Yeah. But then it just reminded me of the kind of principle of non-contradiction. Whereas, you say, I'm not, or something is not this. So you say, I'm not a Marxist.
Yeah,
but
it's not the same as saying I'm a Marxist. Yeah.
It's just that kind of,
Okay. And then he indeed says exactly what we've now been saying on 303 at the bottom. This kind of totality, the non-existing all, not the existing whole, is the goal of dialectical movement that holds it together, exactly as need is its impulse and motor. This kind of totality, the non-existing all, not the existing whole, is the goal of the dialectical movement that holds it together exactly as need is its impulse and motor. That's the whole utopian idea. I think we are in a kind of abyss. we can't move on. Jeder Mensch ist ein Abgrund. Ja. We have to pull ourselves out of this Abgrund. Yeah, Buchner says this in the Whitehead. Jeder Mensch ist ein Abgrund, es schwindelt einem, wenn man hinabschaut. You get dizzy when you look down. Not simple negation. Now, I think we're going to break this now. Any other comments on this text? Nina, what do you think of it? Are you using it in your thesis?
I think now that we worked through it, yes.
But we haven't worked through it enough.
I know, but even like bits and pieces. I mean, that's at the end what I feel I will be able to do with blog. Just I don't know, half of a chapter, and then I can make my own chapter or one paragraph here. Right?
There is an ambiguity in the text itself. If you read it quickly, then you can think, oh yeah, this is just like somebody talking about Hegel. But if you go into it, I hope that we have discovered that there is, behind every corner there is a whole other thing that opens up. So that's why I think it is a philosophical text. It is a text that we can think with, and that we need to think. When we read it, we need to think. We can't just take it in. It needs a thinking response. Although there is a lot of it, that is quite historical. But the way in which he always tries to show how this idealist heritage becomes something else when you make it what he calls materialist, and that's quite a subtle point, which changes everything in a way. I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, and it also, I think, shows nicely how it is not very true what I've read in some biographies of Bloch, that he would just start with thinking that everything that people have said so far is wrong and create his own system from scratch.
No, certainly not.
No.
No.
But it's, as it seems all other philosophy have done it.
Yeah.
You look at what is there and then take and reject what is useful and rework it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, because sometimes I guess if you open Bloch and first you can think, oh, this is from nowhere, but
yeah, exactly, yeah, but it's not the case. No. Okay. Nothingness, final remark maybe, yeah? The negative does not somehow, that's the final page, lie as not at the beginning. Here it's always the thesis, or threatened as nothingness at the end. There it's always the synthesis. It is active only in the middle, medium, just as spirit is medium. As transitoriness, variety, and the seriousness of war, as the night within light, so that light might not decay into the powerless beauty of the unmoved logical. In this way, nothingness becomes an objective Mephistopheles who agitates and creates the world. So it's the moment of contradiction. It is an insecurity factor against the finite determinations becoming fixed. It is the ground of knowledge, as well as the real ground of the necessary downfall of any existing positive, and of the rational which continually turns into the irrational. You see, it makes the finite crumble. It is the ground of knowledge, because as negativity it is consciousness, and it is the real ground of the necessary downfall of an existing positive, and it turns the rational irrational. Every rational order is upset, is exploded. In this way, nothingness in Hegel is completely harnessed to the movement of being. No tohu wabohu, so no creation out of nothing. No, this is a reference to the Genesis, opening of Genesis. That's important. No creatio ex nihilo. Rather, it is, as Hegel maintains, an automatic mainspring of vitality. Negation is the mainspring of vitality. And Bloch just turns it all into this utopian, concrete utopian logic. So, I think there's more that we need to do with Bloch to understand precisely how this dialectic, just as the whole text can be taken either in a simplistic way, you say, oh, this is just a text about Hegel, or in a more telling way, when you look at it closely, it becomes a philosophical text that maintains and defines its own position in dialogue with Hegel. I think what the notion of process requires the same sort of reading in Bloch. So the word process occurs a lot in this text, or several times at least. You can take it just to mean, Hegel talks about the development, the becoming, that's why it's process. But I think there also that there is another layer in Bloch, and that has to do with that's why I said these things at the beginning, has to do with how he recuperates the notion of substance. And then there we can begin to see that. So, we're now already again at the end. And we haven't done Hall again.
But at least we came to an end.
We came to an end with this text a little bit, yeah. But I feel that maybe it would be good to just postpone Hall a little bit longer, and next time go into this notion of substantiality and process in Bloch. I can send you a few, not as hopefully shorter than this one, a few key passages that I think we need to read on substantiality. Also, see if I can find my article. But maybe it's better just as a primary reading, and that we confront that notion with Heidegger's Vom Wesen der Wahrheit, because there we also get a processual view of being, but in a different way. But it has to do with how being is opened up to existence, to Dasein, to the knower. I think this is precisely so important, this Heidegger text, because it here also deals with the question of being. It also deals with the question, what does it mean at the level of substance to think about truth not as correspondence or proposition with the facts, but as something more original. And I think that relates in an interesting and important way to Bloch's notion of substantiality. So, and then when we've done that, the moment would be there to look at Hall's notion of a radical, an-archic, ungrounded, spontaneous creativity that defines what it means to be. Because that, I think, but if you agree with that, then I would want to do it that way. So I will send you some fragments to read, plus read this Heidegger text. And then we meet in 2 weeks' time and talk about that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Thank you.
Thank you.